First up is a film called Heretic, and this is a sort of suspense, horror, thriller film. I saw this one at TIFF, which I bring up because I saw so many films a day there that things come with a little bit of an asterisk just because it's a different set of circumstances than just seeing a film in isolation. But I do distinctly recall seeing Heretic, and I was very scared going into it. The trailers definitely made it seem more terrifying than it is. And I bring that up and I don't want to give too much away, but it is more of a psychological thriller than maybe what I thought it was going to be. It's definitely a combination of all the sort of aspects I mentioned. It is about two Mormon missionary girls played by Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East. And they are on a mission and they end up at the house of a man played by Hugh Grant and they, are trying to convert him. And then things just take a dark, twisty turn. This is, again, in the trailer, so I'm not giving anything away there. I think the saving grace of this film is Hugh Grant. He is so good, and again, not giving anything major away, in his villain era. After Paddington 2, I'm really enjoying this trajectory of the super charming but also semi-deranged, anti-hero villain character. In this one, he is somebody who is basically like obsessed with religion. So when two Mormon missionaries show up to your door, he has sort of an elaborate way of questioning their beliefs and his beliefs. And I did not grow up religious in any way, shape, or form. And if anything, I am culturally and, blood Jewish. So I don't have the religious perspective to bring to this in that sense, but I did actually appreciate a couple of the things that they brought up in terms of framing like world religions and how they work. I don't know the validity of them, especially in comparison historically to each other, but that part of it I thought was a really interesting sort of, thing that does get discussed in film, but maybe not always from a secular perspective. And then it just goes dark and awry and bonkers and all sorts of strange things happen. So, it's one of those movies where I'm like, it is definitely two separate films mushed into one. I do think they work, again, thanks to the performance of Hugh Grant and the actresses, but in the hands of lesser performers, and I guess technically, screenwriters and directors, but the screenwriters and directors are also the ones who made this sort of mishmash thing. I think this would fail horribly, but they managed to make it an interesting, watchable experience. If you are squeamish, this does have some things that are going to make you deeply uncomfortable. Again, I would be really interested to hear the perspective of somebody who did grow up as, in the Mormon church or just in the church hardcore in general. I think Catholics will also relate to a lot of this. There's a lot of sort of theological discussion around it that gets parsed down and looked at through the lens of pop culture, which I was like, oh, this is a really interesting way to look at this. And I honestly had never thought about this way. Seems solid to me. But I, again, don't know how that translates to the actual religious beliefs. So it is a pretty breezy film. It is sub 2 hours. Again, if you are a fan of this genre, if you are a fan of the A24 spooky movie, I think you're going to enjoy this. If you are a little wary of this and everything I've described sounds a little mishmash and you are also a purist for, logic and reason, this is not the film for you. However, I do think it's worth a watch, especially for the Hugh Grant part of it. He's so good in this. It's anyway. So I'm actually going to give this a 3.9 out of 5 because I had limited expectations about it and it managed to subvert some of them. So I always enjoy when a film can do that. 3.9 out of 5 for me, but I'm not going to make this one where I'm like, no, you really got to go see it if you were on the fence about it. The other film I have is, I guess, vaguely thematically related. It is called Small Things Like These, and it stars Cillian Murphy and Emily Watson, and I knew absolutely nothing about this film going into it. I just knew that it had the two of them in it, and I now, in retrospect, wish I had known a little bit more, so I am actually going to give you a few of the, plot synopsis in order to hopefully help your viewing experience. Cillian Murphy stars as this just, kind of everyman in a small Irish town. He's a dad to a bunch of girls. He's a coal merchant, ? I guess that is a job. This takes place in the 80s. It's around Christmas time, and it is about him sort of discovering the atrocities, I guess, the horrors of these church-run laundries that existed that basically seemed like, forced labor camps for young derelict women who, basically women who are probably pregnant, young, or whatever it may be. And I did not know that that's what this was about. 30 minutes into this film, I was like, I don't know what this movie is about. And if I had known that this was a thing that existed, and I would have much more quickly been able to piece together that this is what he was grappling with discovering suffering, and also dealing with like the sort of chokehold that the church has on a small town and the power they wield. And, they run the school where all his daughters go to school, and he's dealing with the morality of like, can we help everyone? Like, he's, I guess, effectively trying to be a good Christian, right? And like, he keeps running into kids who are not being taken care of by their families or the system or whatever it is. And you can tell that he really wants to help them out. But at the same time, it's like, do you go against the literal church? Do you put yourself out there at the expense of your reputation in a small town where that is everything? I think Cillian Murphy is such a good quiet actor. He's very good at the small emote. He doesn't scream. He doesn't yell. He's very good at expressing things with just blankness somehow. I really am impressed by how you can project your emotions onto him. And then, of course, Emily Watson, always a force to be reckoned with. I love her so much. She plays one of the nuns, and she brings just like a venom, but like a saccharine venom to it that I was like, oh, this is why you are so good at this. I, again, did not know a lot going into it. I do think that sort of impacted my experience a little bit. If you are aware that this was a real thing that was happening, the drama will certainly be heightened for you. I do think the drama still is like a quieter drama than something like Heretic. And that's not a bad thing. I think this is a more refined version of grappling with religion, and if you compare something like Cillian Murphy's like very quiet, reserved performance against like the Hugh Grant charming, smarmy, like, but also bonkers performance, it's like total opposite ends somehow of this spectrum. But I don't know if I enjoyed watching small things like these because it is depressing. It's a hard movie. I think there are going to be a lot of Irish folks of a very specific era who are going to be traumatized, but also respect the hell out of this film. And if you are familiar at all with what was going on with these, like forced labor laundries and asylums, etc., you will have a better idea than I did going into it. And that's why I'm informing anybody else who did not know. This is also adapted from a book, I should say. I don't know how it holds up as an adaptation, but if you have the emotional bandwidth in this moment in time for a bummer of a film, which I also don't know if I had when I watched this, that was my mistake, this is a good candidate for that. But I do think that, like, I wish some of the information had been a little front-loaded and not assumed that the audience did know a lot of these things going into it. Like, you don't have to spoon-feed me, but make it a little more clear, A minor note, but I think the performances, again, much like Heretic, are the thing that saved this. I am going to give this a 3.8 out of 5.